This is a clip from my third video, and I must admit I was just as excited as these people to see this ship and hear these words from Elon Musk.
We're faced with a choice. Which future do you want? Do you want the future where we become a spacefaring civilization and are in many worlds and are out there among the stars, or one where we are forever confined to Earth? And I say it is the first. And I hope you agree with me. Yeah. All right. To Mars. Exactly. Our plan is in basically 1 to 2 months to do the 20-kilometer or 65-foot flight with Starship Mark 1. So, and we think we're probably going to adjust the grid fin design to be kind of like a... I think we'll probably have Mark 2 built within a couple of months or less, and Mark 3 maybe 3 months, that type of thing. Mark 4, 4 months, maybe 5 months. And we would seek to go to orbit with probably Mark 4 or Mark 5. So we would, I mean, this is going to sound totally nuts, but I think we want to try to reach orbit in less than 6 months.
Well, hindsight is always 20/20, but those goals, now that we look at them almost a year later, were kind of nuts. Moving at a blistering pace, one prototype after another was destroyed, and as much as we want to tell ourselves that this is part of the plan, given what Elon said on that windy night last year, it just isn't. And as the 6-month time frame came and went and not a single prototype even got an inch off the ground, well, aside from exploding, it began to appear that both Elon and his supporters were a bit delusional. Was Elon pushing things too quickly? Well, just a little over a month ago, the moment of vindication came when SN5 was able to take to the skies, and although it didn't get to orbit, and although it didn't get to 20 kilometers, at least it did manage to make a hop. It did successfully take off, and it did successfully land, albeit not perfectly. And so it was with SN6, a good hop but not a completely perfect landing, and so many expected another hop until they got the process perfected. But Elon is still pushing at a breakneck pace, going for a 20-kilometer attempt with the next launch. Is this simply his madness continuing? Is this going to result in more wrecked prototypes and further delays, and possibly put the organization at risk? Or is this part of the extremely aggressive genius that has always made Elon Musk successful and very rich? Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Angry Astronaut. So, it just doesn't seem that long ago, and from terms of developing a whole new rocket system, it really wasn't that long ago that Elon Musk was standing on that stage in Boca Chica on that windy night, rolling out the first prototype of the Starship. And all of us were filled with such a sense of optimism. I mean, it just seemed impossible. This thing sprang out of nowhere, and everyone was so excited, especially when Elon Musk was talking about this thing taking to the skies, and the fact that, he said, I know this sounds crazy or something along those lines, but we're looking for going to orbit by the end of 2020. Well, that obviously proved to be an example of Elon time, although I tend not to blame him terribly much because, in my opinion, a few things happened that he didn't exactly count on. I think he lost more prototypes in that early developmental stage than he was counting on. And I think that's why he had a come to Jesus meeting, as a lot of people like to call it, at least over here in the United States, with his staff, talking to them about if anybody had any concerns whatsoever about how the construction was going, down to the lowliest construction worker, the lowest level welder, whatever, that they had an open door policy to talk to him. Because frankly, I think he was tired of losing prototypes. And sure enough, we finally stopped losing prototypes, at least during the pressure tests and during static fires, although we lost one of those, a prototype during a static fire test, but we were moving forward. And then we had these hops, these two successful hops, albeit not completely successful, but still two hops that went pretty well. And, the enthusiasm is back. We're making real progress here. And Elon was talking as if we were going to continue these hops until we got the process perfected. But that's not what's going to happen. Instead, this newest version of the prototype, this newest prototype rather, that's coming out, is going to be going to 20 kilometers. And this is before we've gotten our 150-foot hops complete. So this time, we're going to be sending up a ship that has a lot more equipment on it, 3 engines instead of 1. And this time, if it blows up, there's going to be more loss in terms of money and time invested, that sort of thing. So, I have to ask myself a question. Is Elon not happy unless a prototype blows up? Because that's exactly what happened with the Falcon 9. He had one first stage after another blow up while he was trying to land those. So is that what we're looking to have accomplished here? Is, that the only thing that passes for proper advancement is if something explodes during the process? I don't know. Is the guy just crazy? Well, actually, I tend to think that he isn't. As odd as this approach may be, and as different as this approach is from every other rocket company, aviation company, everybody else that's in the market. Not only does this rocket, is he moving forward very quickly on this rocket, and he's going to be spending $5 billion in total on the development of it in a very short amount of time. And I suspect that he's spent a fair amount of that already. And he's doing it for a rocket that may not even have a market for it. But once again, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to explain to you why none of this matters and why Elon's breakneck pace, this insane, mad dash towards success that he's taking, no matter how many prototypes he has to blow up, has been the key to his success in the past and is going to be the key to his success in the future. And we're going to get started on that right now. So here's how the other guys do their tests. This is the solid rocket booster for the SLS, and a test that was done in Utah very recently. And the booster ran for 2 solid minutes, or twice as long as the Starship hops, and it didn't explode. As a matter of fact, if it had exploded, then it probably would have delayed the entire project for at least another year, if not more, or possibly gotten the SLS canceled completely. Maybe it wouldn't have been so bad if it had exploded. But the point is that this was very safe and it resulted in a very successful test, but the SLS is running billions of dollars over budget and should have launched in 2017. So is doing things slow and safe really the best way to develop new rockets? Although I have to admit, this was pretty damn cool. And these guys do things pretty safely as well. As a matter of fact, I didn't see any evidence whatsoever that they were going to be launching anything anytime soon. All I got was a security guard who escorted me out of their parking lot when I paid them a visit. But in any event, they're supposed to have the New Glenn testing in 2021 on its first flight, supposedly. And then, of course, there's ULA, who has been the mainstay of NASA for a very long period of time, and they do things in a very similar fashion, testing things in a very slow and methodical process, but to their credit, they have launched probes throughout the solar system, they've carried out many contracts for the US military, they have been a reliable partner of NASA for an extremely long period of time. And like Blue Origin, they are working on a new generation of heavy lift rocket. The difference is, of course, is they've actually launched something into orbit over the last several decades, but this is the Vulcan, and it has similar capacity in terms of fairing size and also in terms of its lift capabilities to the New Glenn and also perhaps to the Falcon Heavy. And it's been in development for a few years, but still, again, to ULA's credit, they've made some fairly quick progress on this and are looking to take it all the way to the moon in early 2021. And the Vulcan will feature, wait for it, reusability, utilizing something called the HIAD, or High Altitude Aerodynamic Decelerator, at least for the first stage of use, and then ultimately it will also deploy parachutes to save the engines and therefore about 70% of the cost. And none of this is happening until 2024, which means in a few years, ULA will be able to compete with the Falcon Heavy. But ULA might argue that there's no need for a rocket with this kind of payload yet, that the Falcon Heavy launched once in 2018, and that was just to get a roadster up into orbit, or actually out into the solar system, and then 2 more launches in 2019, and no launches in 2020. They would argue that there is no rush to get the Vulcan competitive with the Falcon Heavy because the market simply isn't there, and ULA's intention has always been to satisfy what the current market demands. And this is why nobody, and I mean nobody, is trying to develop anything like the Starship at a frenzied pace. The market just doesn't seem to be there for a ship that can carry 100 tons of cargo to low Earth orbit, or 100 tons to the moon. They would argue, at least SpaceX's competitors would argue, that Elon Musk is pouring millions if not billions of dollars into a project that is years, if not decades away from being useful. But are they right? Well, of course they're not, at least not in my opinion. This is the Aurora station from Orion Span, which I've already covered in a previous episode, but I think it's important that we bring it up again because they're talking about launching this thing in 2021, which, by the way, is the updated launch window that Elon is talking about to get the Starship into low Earth orbit. If successful, this will be the first commercial space station, the first commercial space hotel, actually, with 4 guests and 2 crew for a cost of $9.5 million per person for 12 days in space, a hell of a lot less than people are paying right now to be space tourists. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the Starship could deploy something like this far more efficiently and far more inexpensively than any heavy launch vehicle that currently exists, including the Falcon Heavy, especially if you want to add additional modules onto it as depicted here. And Orion Span don't want to get this thing going in 2024 or sometime in the future. They want to get it going next year. And there's only one ship on the books that would be capable of making that happen, and that's the Starship. And by the way, if you think that Orion Span is a made-up company with a bunch of nice CGI images, keep in mind that they have already pre-sold at least 4 months worth of stays in advance, and that costs a down payment of $80,000 per person. I can't imagine people with that kind of money would throw it away on something that was a scam, but who knows? And aside from space stations, there is of course asteroid mining. And look at this. Yes, this ship is specifically designed for the Starship. As a matter of fact, TransAstra, as this company is called, is not going to be able to deploy their asteroid mining ships without the Starship in low Earth orbit. In fact, the only barrier to this multi-trillion-dollar industry has been the cost per kilogram of delivering something like this into orbit. It simply has not been possible before now. So it's in Elon's interest to pour as much effort and as much money and as much haste into constructing the Starship as possible in order to make things like this possible. By the way, this ship is called the Queen Bee, and it captures C-class asteroids to bring them back to low Earth orbit for use as propellant depots, using part of the C-class asteroid to provide the necessary propellant for it to transport itself from one area to another. So as long as the Starship can deploy it, it can go on its way and mine on its own. And by the way, this thing could also clear space junk out of low Earth orbit, another potential source of revenue for SpaceX that could only be delivered by the Starship. And by the way, TransAstra is just one of several asteroid mining companies that have been held prisoner by Earth's gravity and the high cost per kilogram that has prevented them from making a fortune off of mining the wealth that exists in our solar system in close proximity to our planet. And finally, Starship also has the ability to immediately pay for its own development. And yes, you guessed that right, through Starlink. Currently, the Falcon 9 can only deploy 60 satellites at a time, whereas a Starship could deploy 400, meaning 30 launches could deploy 12,000 satellites. And as most of us know, this system not only has the ability to deliver high-speed internet to every man, woman, and child on Earth, no matter how remote they might be, but also to generate $50 billion a year for SpaceX, or double the total budget of NASA. Now, if Elon is able to actually get the Starship into orbit by the end of next year, as he is currently planning to do, what a massive game changer this would represent for SpaceX. The $5 billion developmental budget of Starship would be paid for in no time, and SpaceX would be catapulted into first place by far when it comes to private space companies. With this much at stake, Elon's sense of urgency is very understandable, especially when you consider how much there is left to do. We don't just have to get Starship to 20 kilometers, we can't even get it to orbit on its own. Well, theoretically we can, but even Elon has said that that's not practical. A Starship sent to orbit without the Super Heavy would have to be stripped down so much that it wouldn't even have a heat shield, thus making it impossible to test re-entry without it burning up. Kind of a pointless exercise. So we also need the Super Heavy. We need to do pressure tests with that vehicle. We need to do hops. We need to do 20-kilometer tests with that. None of these things have even started yet. So there is so much left to do that there is little wonder that Elon is already moving towards a 20-kilometer test with the Starship. And by the way, I tend to vary between my pronunciations between kilometer and kilometer. I apologize for that. And by the way, there's also the problem of refueling. All of that needs to be tested and perfected before the Starship can truly be considered a successful vehicle. If ULA or especially Blue Origin were to do something like this, they would never get it done. As a matter of fact, they would never even try. They wouldn't see the point. They don't have the vision. And that's a vision that has nothing to do with market demands or dollar signs, but rather spreading the human species throughout the solar system for the sake of exploring it and also to ensure our long term survival by making us a multiplanetary civilization. That is Elon's ultimate goal and always has been, and it's not going to happen in his lifetime, or mine for that matter, unless he has a huge sense of urgency. Doesn't his method make a whole lot more sense now? So, sorry, just taking a sip from my hated Boeing Starliner coffee cup. And by the way, we are halfway to our goal. We have 20,000 subscribers now. Actually, we have just blown past that. Thank you so much. Once again, I'm just in a state of shock. I don't see how in the world that this was accomplished, but I am so happy and grateful that this has happened. But back to the Starship. Do you know what makes me the most excited about this entire project? It's not the fact that Elon has this unique fashion of moving towards development, that he's willing to spend all of the money and blow up all the prototypes that's necessary in order to achieve success as rapidly as possible, just so that he can make a market happen that isn't currently there. Everything that we've talked about in the video, the fact that he's willing to spend more money than anybody else, except for people who are spending taxpayer dollars, like the folks who are building the SLS, but actually he's pouring about as much money into this on an annual basis as being poured into the SLS or somewhere in that vicinity in order to get it done as quickly as possible. But it's not all of that. It's the fact that the solar system holds so many wonders, something that we discovered just very recently. As a matter of fact, less than 24 hours after I released a video about Venus, as you guys know, it was announced that we have further proof of life on Venus. And this is actually nothing tremendously new. We've had a lot of evidence about Venus that suggested the presence of life. And actually, I've put a video in the description that I put out about a month ago that talks about this as well. But enough about that, enough about me. The fact of the matter is that it seems, especially after my interview with Dr. Levin, that there may be life all over the solar system, at least the inner solar system and even the outer solar system with the moons of the gas giants, that we humans and every form of life on Earth may actually be part of a giant ecosystem that spans the solar system. And this may be because of transpermia, because we share life back and forth and that are carried on meteorites or something along those lines. But I rather think that it's because life is that natural. It's part of the development of a solar system as almost as certainly as the nuclear fusion that makes stars burn and gravitational forces that causes planets to orbit their suns. I think that the existence of life is that natural. I think that we're going to find life not only on Venus, not only on Mars, but also in the oceans of Europa, in the oceans of Enceladus. We're going to find methanogenic life on Titan. And I've talked about all these things in previous episodes. We are going to find life everywhere because where planets develop and where there's the potential for life, even on Venus, where life seems impossible, life takes hold somehow. And the only way that we're going to be able to confirm this and to study it in depth is to go there. And the ship that will take us there is the Starship. And man, that can't happen fast enough for me. And I don't think it can happen fast enough for Elon either. For him, this isn't about money, even though certainly I'm not going to make any excuses for the guy. He certainly wants to make money off of this, and he's become immensely rich with his business strategy, as aggressive as it is. But no, I think it's because this has been his dream. He wants to explore the cosmos as far out as our technology will allow. And that's what the Starship is going to allow mankind to do in ways that no other ship is going to permit us to do. And I hope that I see this happen in my lifetime. And since I and Elon are pretty close to the same age, I think he's feeling very much the same way. I think we have wonders waiting for us in the solar system that are going to completely change our perceptions on what happens with the development of a solar system and just how common life is in the universe. But we're not going to find those things out until we finish the Starship and until we strike out into the solar system. So I think that's why Elon is working as hard as he is to get it done. And that's why I support him so completely. So until the Starship is ready to make it to orbit and ready to make that first flight to wherever it goes to find life in its abundance and in all of its fullness, as I'm pretty certain that it does exist throughout the solar system, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.